I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris.
The marginalized communities that educate me every single day.
What a variety of whiteness we have here, with like a rainbow of beige.
Woke white men get together to support Kamala Harris, and absolute cringe ensues. An MSNBC contributor comes unhinged on live TV, and an insane TikToker makes a bizarre attack on fiscal conservatives. All this and so much more is coming up on today's episode of Brad vs. Everyone, my daily podcast where I take on the craziest ideas from across the internet and across our politics from a center-right, independent perspective. If you're new here, please do consider subscribing and sticking around, and regardless, do remember to hit that like button as we go along to reward my suffering through all the cringe and stupidity, and do comment with your thoughts. I do read the comments, and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Alright, well, up first, in case yesterday's edition where we poured through the lowlights from the White Women for Kamala call wasn't painful enough, today we're doing some follow-up because they've had another one of these calls, a White Men for Kamala call, and it too was incredibly cringeworthy. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't able to watch the whole thing this time. I just didn't have it in me, but I did find some highlights and some reporting on it that we're going to go through together. First, here's some context for the event from CNBC. A White Dudes for Harris online fundraising and organizing rally raised more than $4 million for the presidential campaign of Vice President Kamala Harris on Monday night, with speakers who included would-be running mates, Hollywood actors, and labor leaders. More than 150,000 joined the online stream for the event, which was broadcast on YouTube, blowing past the original target of 10,000 RSVPs set by organizers several days ago. The call is the male version of a White Women Answer the Call Zoom fundraising meeting that drew more than 160,000 women to support Harris last week after President Joe Biden dropped out of the election against former President Donald Trump and endorsed the vice president as his replacement atop the Democratic ticket. So you get the idea. All these woke white men got together to talk about how much they love Kamala Harris and to virtue signal, of course, that they're one of the good white people. Here are some cringeworthy highlights from the event compiled by journalist Brianna Morello.
I'm white, I'm a dude, and I'm for Harris.
Over the last few years, I've been thinking a lot about men.
I'm not sure if you guys can recall that feeling you had on the night of Tuesday, November 8th, 2016. I stood over my kid's bed and I wept.
White nationalists in MAGA, they want to speak for you specifically as white men.
In the marginalized communities that educate me every single day, that this is a constant education for all of us.
Kamala is carrying on her shoulders 248 years of pain, of agony, of hope, of frustration. And no matter how high she jumps, no matter how many degrees she has, no matter how good her grades are, she's never good enough because they're always moving the line.
What a variety of whiteness we have here, with like a rainbow of beige.
Man, I am scared to death of what the future could look like if we go back to another Trump administration, one that truly left working construction white men behind.
You've seen it with congressional leaders who have called Vice President Harris a DEI candidate.
Of course, men are also more free in a country where we have a president who stands up for things like access to abortion care.
Let's be clear about who Donald Trump and JD Vance are. Donald Trump is a 34-time convicted felon, an adjudicated rapist, and a congenital liar. He's a fraud. And JD Vance is his mini-me. I even created my own cognitive test that describes the two of them. Sofa, dolphin, shark, cats, convict.
Real men respect women, their decisions, their careers, and it's pretty clear that Donald Trump and JD Vance don't.
A woman president, man, how exciting.
If there is a God, she's a terrible writer.
One day, we all will be asked what we did to stop this MAGA movement. What will your answer be?
So, there was a lot to unpack there, from the cringe to the substantively bizarre or questionable. Like, for one thing, my dude, crying over election results that don't go your way is not normal behavior, and suggests that you lack the emotional resiliency of a fully functioning adult. I would maybe talk about that with a therapist, not to hundreds of thousands of strangers. But that's just me. Personally. In the same way, I just can't stand this emphasis that's being placed on the white male identity. As a white male, I just think, like, no, stop. I already don't really care what you're about to say next. Because if you actually think that identity qualifiers make a following statement more or less true or false or accurate or not or insightful or not, then you're not a thinking person. You're an automaton, an NPC. And I think America should be trying to break down the divisions between these identity groups and let things like race and gender fade into the background in terms of how we group ourselves, and instead group ourselves over actual common experiences and actual common traits, not just boxes we check off on the census. But these kinds of perverse identity politics to the extreme political displays and campaigning very much do the opposite. They very much reinforce race as a meaningful divider between people. And some of this is just incredibly cringe. A rainbow of beige? A woman president, how exciting! Some of these men are just so obviously desperate to be seen as one of the good white men, or to be seen as allies or feminist or whatever, and it's just resulting in them just totally humiliating and debasing themselves. A woman president isn't an inherently good thing. It's also not an inherently bad thing. It just is what it is. She'd either be a good president or not, but her gender doesn't really have any impact on that, one way or the other. It's not a reason to vote against someone, but it's also not a good reason to vote for someone. And I will say the freedom line from Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary and potential Harris VP, is not going over well online. In a sense, I think what he said is actually true, that in a world where there's widespread access to abortion, men are more free to engage in reckless sexual behavior and avoid the consequences of their actions, or having to be responsible for the children they father. But that's not a vision of freedom that a lot of people think is a good thing. And if you, like many pro-life Americans, believe that abortion is the ending of a human life, then it's actually a horrific thing, escape from personal responsibility at the cost of another's life. The thing that bothered me the most about everything I've seen from this call is the sense of white guilt, of collective blame that many of these men seem to have internalized. This even shows up in the promotional materials that I took a look at. For example, one of their message points is, quote, "We need to be honest with ourselves and each other about the role we've played in our nation's history, good and bad." Excuse me? What? You haven't played any role in our nation's history. I haven't played any role in our nation's history, outside of our lifetimes, of course. But they're essentially asserting that white men as a collective today bear responsibility for the actions of people who look like us that came before us in generations before we were born. That is far more than cringe. It's actually incredibly evil. Assigning guilt and blame to people for actions they never engaged in, never had any control over, all because of immutable traits about themselves that they were born with, is actually one of the most deeply evil ideas in modern progressive politics. But here it is, completely embraced, embodied, and pronounced by the white men for Kamala camp. So I view this as more than just cringeworthy identity politics on steroids. I view it as a disturbing double down on toxic racial politics that's only going to further divide Americans and lead to less social harmony and progress, not more. Other than that, though, woke white dudes, You're doing amazing. Up next, we've got to talk about an absolutely insane clip from MSNBC, where one analyst just made a completely deranged and baseless accusation of racism against Vice Presidential Republican nominee JD Vance. Let's take a listen.
The stats are there. More and more Americans choosing not to have kids, which again emphasizes why JD Vance's comments about childless Americans, childless cat ladies, could be so politically damaging.
Well, so what's interesting is this natalism that comes from an authoritarian playbook, right? That there need to be more white children, right? That's the idea that there's, this is about great replacement theory racism, right? This is what this is. So don't misunderstand it for him wanting more children. He wants a certain kind of, racist thing.
My standards for mainstream liberal media are on the floor, but this one still stunned me for its astounding level of ignorance and bad faith. What this MSNBC pundit, a woman named Molly Jong-Fast, who apparently has had me blocked on Twitter for a long time, I'm only just now realizing this, what she's essentially saying is that JD Vance's whole shtick where he's criticized childless people, which I've talked about. I'm not a fan of much of what he's had to say about it, but he's very concerned about family and about the low birth rate in America and about promoting child rearing and increasing the birth rate. She's saying that he doesn't actually care about that. He only just wants more white kids, more white babies, with no apparent source or basis for that claim, which is bad enough in its own right, but especially horrific because JD Vance literally has biracial children. He is married to an Indian American woman, and his children are of mixed race. I have my criticisms of him, but he's a proud family man, and his family embodies that his vision of natalism is very much not just about more white babies. And the fact that this woman would make such an astoundingly ignorant claim on cable news with her whole chest, and that not a single other person on the panel, and I watched the context in the couple of minutes surrounding the clip as well, would point out to her what an absurd thing she just said, and this bit of information that they all do surely know. Usha Vance, his wife, has received tons of media coverage in recent weeks, is very telling. There is a way to criticize some of the remarks that JD Vance has made about childless people. I have, but this is not it. This is an absurd and irresponsible weaponization of false racism charges to blatantly smear people on the other side of the political aisle. That's not just a total injustice and totally unfair to JD Vance and his family. It's also insulting to actual victims of racism. And it's yet another example of this widespread boy who cried wolf phenomenon in liberal media, where they overuse the term racism so much, they constantly bandy it around when it's not appropriate, that then nobody takes them seriously when they actually identify something racist. The biggest losers of that are the actual victims of racism. In a just media environment, someone like Molly Jong-Fast would actually face professional consequences for this big an error in judgment and basic journalistic practices. But we do not exist in that kind of environment, so you can expect to see her pop up again in just a couple days with another jaw-dropping, astoundingly bad faith argument. All right, guys, now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my segment where I take on the craziest ideas from across the clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Make sure you're subscribed if you aren't yet, and do remember to hit that like button as we go along to reward my suffering as I lose brain cells for your viewing pleasure. And now, let's take a look at a TikToker explaining why people who are fiscally conservative are just selfish?
Socially liberal but fiscally conservative is just code for I'm a selfish little brat who doesn't want to pay my taxes, okay? That's all it means. Because if you start asking them about what's fiscal policies they care about, it's always the taxes. They don't care about deregulation or interest rates. No, it's specifically their tax bill, okay? And they're socially liberal in that they don't want to actively harm minorities, but the fact they're not willing to contribute to the collective pot that helps those people, are you really a social liberal? Because if you're not going to pay for those social programs, how does that work, right? And in theory, you could have someone who says, well, we should legalize abortion, and we should legalize gay marriage, and we should, do all these things that are in theory free, right? And then just have a very conservative trickle-down economic type thing, right? Those people could exist, but they don't, because that's not what anyone means when they talk about it. And it pisses me the off. They're like, I'm a fiscal conservative. No, you just don't like taxes. You just are selfish and greedy. That's what you are. You just don't like taxes. Like, yeah, in theory that position exists, but it's very rare.
Well, guys, he said the F-bomb a bunch of times in quick succession, so he must be correct. I can't really think of any other explanation or response. That obviously has to be the case. In all seriousness, this just made me roll my eyes so hard when I first saw it. I mean, let me get this straight. Wanting to keep more of my own money makes me selfish. But you demanding that you should get more of my money that I worked to earn makes you generous. The math isn't mathing, Cupcake. And his whole premise is wrong. You know, I'm somebody, I wouldn't call myself socially liberal, fiscally conservative, but I would call myself fiscally conservative. And I care about a lot more than just lowering taxes. I care about free trade. I care about deregulation. I care about cutting government spending and government waste. I care about balancing the budget and the national debt. But yes, I do care about cutting taxes. And there's nothing selfish about that. It's not wrong to have the most line of sight, or perhaps the most emphasis on the thing that's most directly affecting you. Every couple of weeks, huge amounts being taken out of your paycheck and sent to God knows what wasteful and inefficient bureaucracies. I mean, you're telling Americans who have struggled to even afford groceries or to keep their rent payments on time and keep a roof over their families' heads that they are selfish if they're upset about how much of their paychecks coming out to go to other people or to go to government bureaucracy and waste. Really? That makes them selfish? You can't see why that would be top of mind for them? And I just can't believe anyone still thinks that taxes are just a collective pot of money that go to help people. Oh, babe. Oh, sweet summer child. I've never heard a more naive notion in my life. Huge amounts of our taxes go to waste and fraud. Massive amounts go to corporate welfare, crony capitalist handouts to well-connected industries, to the military-industrial complex, to the Pentagon. Even the money that's meant to help people often goes into bloated, inefficient, wasteful programs that often end up trapping them in poverty through welfare cliffs and many other bad incentives. The amount of every dollar taken out of my paycheck in taxes that actually goes directly to helping people is astonishingly, vanishingly small. And my friend, the government is not the only way to do things. If people were able to keep more of their money and tax less, more would go to charity. More would be invested in local businesses that employ people. I just continued to be astonished by the confidence with which left-wing people will make these bold pronouncements on TikTok, even though they're so incredibly ignorant about the things they speak about. You guys let me know what you thought of this young man's opinion in the comments below. And now I'll read a few of your comments from the last episode before we wrap up today's show. One person writes, "As a white woman, I'm embarrassed by these women and would like to apologize to you, Brad, and everyone else who had to witness the most disgusting portrayal of bootlicking I think I've ever seen or heard. While I understand your sentiment, please do not apologize. You have no responsibility for this, and it's not on you at all, just because these people look like you or check off a similar box on the census." Another person said, "When she said, 'put your listening ears on,' I considered pulling both my ears off." Yes, me as well. That part, her whole part was just so obnoxious and so condescending. I mean, she's literally a former teacher who makes TikTok videos speaking to adults about politics like she's speaking to kindergartners, and somehow we're not supposed to find that absolutely maddening and insulting. I don't get it. Another person says, "Oh gosh, Brad, that's 2.5 hours of your life you'll never get back." Yes, it is. So you should reward my suffering with a like and subscribing and all that. But also, I will be honest, I did watch it on 2 times speed, so it's really more like an hour and 15 minutes. But still, guys, it was painful. Another person says, "Brad, when you critique the right, you may lose subscribers, but you're left with people who can handle the truth, no matter their political affiliation. It is refreshing to hear you value truth over fame and fortune. Keep up the excellent work." You know, I absolutely will. Thank you. And like I said, I'd rather tell the truth and lose subscribers occasionally than only preach to one side of the aisle. And if folks can't handle that, then maybe they're not the right audience for this show. Another person says, ugh, come on, dude. Can you guys stop with the whole anti-white woman stuff? It's getting gross. I'm kind of confused by this. I don't know what I said anywhere that was anti-white women. I'm anti-woke white women who are doing insane identity politics nonsense and humiliating themselves with cringeworthy, bizarre Zoom videos and rants. But nothing I've said or done is anti-white women. I really, in general, what? I don't know what you're talking about there, my friend. You might need to put down the crack pipe. All right, everybody, that is it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit that like button before you go, and we'll talk again tomorrow.